So while people are getting settled in, thanks for being here, and thanks to all of our hosts and organizers for making a great event. I'm excited to represent the panel for this next session focused on how we think about data literacy in industry context, company context, organizational context, outside of academia, and have a really amazing group here who have graciously agreed to sit behind a table instead of stand. But hopefully you'll be able to give them your attention as we go through this. So briefly, we're just going to introduce ourselves. I do think it's important that we all get to know each other. My name is Dan Kolosky. I am head of learning programs at the Rue Institute, which some of you have heard about as a campus of Northeastern in Portland, Maine. And I teach in analytics. I'm a professor of practice. I spent my career, though not in academia, in enterprise software, building IT operations and cybersecurity tools, which was largely the application of analytics against IT telemetry. So that's sort of where I come from, a couple decades there. Kishore, maybe just introduce yourself.
Sure. Quickly, I've been in the industry for about 25 years, various roles, senior director and so on and so forth, and data platform, data analytics and so on and so forth. Currently, I'm a startup advisor as well as an adjunct faculty here at Northeastern as well, teaching data engineering and large language models. Seems like there's a lot of interest in that space right now.
Hi, Stephen Gatchell. I'm the director of data advisory at Big ID. It's a small software company, late stage startup, I would call it. And it's really around data discovery and classification. And I basically work with large to small companies trying to figure out their data, right? So data literacy, super important. Prior to that, I was a practitioner working for multiple companies and actually hired a data literacy practitioner and got a program up and running at a company called Bose. I don't know if you heard about headphones and so forth. Oh, there's the mic. So pleasure to be here and looking forward to sharing some of my lovely lessons learned.
Caitlin?
So my name is Caitlin Porter. I am the Data Fluency Program Manager at HarborVest Partners, which is a private markets firm. We're headquartered here in Boston, but also have offices around the globe. So I'm responsible for moving our 12 to 1,300 employees through what is initially a data fluency sprint and upskilling them, and then we'll see what continuous development looks like. This was a big industry shift for me. I've been there about 2.5 years. Before that, I was doing a similar role, but in an education nonprofit.
Hi, Valerie Logan. I'm the CEO and founder of an organization called the Data Lodge. We are your home, pun intended, for data literacy. You like that, right? So for 4 years, in 2019, I created this organization as a means in which to provide support to data literacy program leaders across sectors and industries and domains. I do that through a train-the-trainer model and a peer community, so I'm not a consulting organization. We have 61 program leads in our community now from organizations like, we have Lane Morrison from U.S. Department of Education. Our recent member is Susan Gracia from Northeastern, and we have organizations like Mayo Clinic, Sony PlayStation, General Motors, who are all fostering data literacy programs in different ways. Formerly, I was a Gartner analyst who crafted the data literacy research in the context of the Chief Data Officer agenda. So that definition from Gartner up there, that looked familiar. So, great to be here, thank you.
Great. So in the best private sector sort of focus, we're going to start by trying to solve problems. And one of the nice things about the private sector is that in industry is that the competitive pressures force organizations to often at least be willing to have conversations about adaptations to new things, like the data literacy conversation. However, all is not sunshine and roses in the private sector. It's complicated. It's difficult. So I wanted to start with roadblocks that people have observed in building data literacy initiatives and data fluency initiatives inside organizations, and how you've managed to overcome them. Maybe we'll start, Valerie, on your end, and we'll come this way.
Sure. I think roadblocks start with even the fact that you use the term data literacy and data fluency in the same sentence. I think one of the biggest roadblocks is even being explicit and clear on what do we mean by these terms, what are we solving for, what is the case for change, and how do we create really a lot of excavating that case for change and being very clear on what are we really solving for. I think the sessions this morning were incredibly helpful because they were great examples of what does this really look like in practice, why does it matter, what changes when we actually foster a data literacy program and have those kinds of impacts. So for me, I would just offer up one, and then others can have others. So the main roadblock I see is just, first of all, what is it? Is it just hype? Why does it matter? And what will change for the business by actually affecting stronger data literacy? So I would start with that roadblock.
So building an ROI use case and a terminology baseline that everybody understands.
That is resonant in a way that people are like, absolutely, I don't know how we could not do that.
Yeah, great. Caitlin, you're in the middle of it. How's it?
Yes.
What are you observing that makes it hard?
Well, I think, you need buy-in from people. And, in my role, I am responsible for what we describe as the data culture pillar of our data transformation. So thinking about, we have technology investment happening, we have our culture happening, and then we also have work processes. So these are sort of the pillars that we're thinking about as we transform our data environment. And culture is really, really tricky. People are very comfortable in a corporate environment to go to a training and learn how to use a system. So when they come to a data fluency program and they get something other than being taught how to use Power BI, they're like, what is this? This is a waste of my time. And so being able to communicate effectively that we're looking at behavioral change and this is how this is going to happen is very challenging.
Interesting. So a combination of both linking the content to behavioral change and allowing space for not just sort of systems training and lowercase training, but teaching of sort of the higher order sets of activities. Interesting. Stephen, what have you observed?
Yeah, so two quick things, and it's really the justification of creating a data literacy program. I'll start with that, because one is, if you go to executives and you talk about this data literacy program, one, they think they are data literate already. So have that conversation with the CEO that you are not data literate, neither is the board, and neither are your executives. That's an awesome conversation, and probably career limiting, by the way, just FYI, be very careful of the words you choose. And then the second one is, it's always about trade-offs, right? There's only so much budget, and you have conversations with people in like research and engineering that says, I'm not getting my engineer because you want to hire a data literacy lead. And so do we go to market with our new product on time, or do we go late because you want to reallocate funds, right? And so you have this conversation about short-term and long-term strategies and gains and so forth. And if you're in the right economic environment, that's cool. It's a lot easier conversation. When you're in the wrong economic environment, which seems like we always seem to be at certain companies, the conversation is a very lengthy one, and you have to really have a good story. So we talked last night a little bit about storytelling. You have to have a very good story about exactly what you're going to deliver, how you're going to deliver it, when you're going to deliver it, and show that you can exceed value of what you're doing versus the offsets that you're not going to do or the company's not going to do.
So making the case for trade-offs and the validity of that trade-off, as well as not burning your career-ending units by telling the board they don't know anything about data literacy. Yeah, that's good advice. Kishore, what have you observed?
One of the biggest challenges that I have seen, having had this conversation with a lot of executives at Stanley Black & Decker, Bose, even companies like Adobe, which is pretty well known in digital space, almost all of these, one of the biggest fundamental things I've seen a pattern around that is, especially for executives or anybody else, it's the unlearning of what you already think you know. That to me has always been the biggest challenge. People always come in with a certain preconceived notions of what they think they do know, especially in the domain they've been in those businesses. They really know that space really well because that's what they've been doing for multiple decades, if you will. How do you get them to see the data that is showing them something completely different from their gut feeling? Almost always, every one of them will resort to that gut feeling of looking at that. So trying to get them to unlearn it and trying to do that. That, to me, I found to be one of the most compelling challenges.
So we've got not just trade-offs that we need to contend with, but sort of inertia, organizational inertia and behavior of a pre-existing way of doing things that needs to almost be undone if you're going to be in a data-first culture. Yeah, I've observed the same. We talked a little bit this morning about useful frameworks for thinking about different titles and associated skill sets and roles. I wonder if we could talk a little bit, as you observe in organizations, because titles are themselves very fluid in companies, functional roles and how those have related to learning paradigms and skill set clusters that you are focusing on in your own work. Maybe we could start in this direction this time, Kishore?
Sure. It's just like with any other areas, silos gets created. There is the data scientist, then there's the data analytics teams, and then you got the you got the BI teams, and then so on and so forth, and IT. All of these, unfortunately, right, when you look at data doesn't really care. It doesn't care about a home. It just flows. It's a horizontal, it's just there. It just moves all through the system. What does a business depend on? It depends upon the data as it flows through the system. So that kind of a notion of looking across different areas is, I find people almost always, what are your role? I mean, immediately you start introducing yourselves like, okay, I am the head of this, I'm this, whatever it is, right? And almost always, the mind goes to that mode of thinking. Okay, so you're only responsible for here. After this, we don't talk to you about it, or you're not going to much value to it. So to me, I find that to be almost always the most difficult thing to do. I always like to say, let's start off by talking about the problem. Let's not care about where you come from, what group you belong to.
So abstracting out of the specific organizational context, but focusing sort of functionally at a more general level in the organization. Yeah, Stephen, what have you observed in
I think
roles?
words matter, right? So don't start with job titles. That'd be my first recommendation. Just exactly what you said is you talk about the problem, you talk about what needs to be done and what are the capabilities that you need to drive. Once you start getting into job titles, people have preconceived notions, wrong definitions, you're talking past each other. I would say the second thing is really understanding the hierarchy of who you're talking to, what's in it for them. So you can't go and teach a CEO data engineering. They're not going to care about the tool sets. They're not going to care about the problems of transferring information from source to target. What they care about is how the heck are we using data and what is the value that I'm getting out of my investment, period, right? But then when you get down to the data engineering level, they should also know about your strategies and the data strategy and what they're doing and how it links up through, but it doesn't have to be a gross detail either. It's just connecting the dots for them. So stay away from job titles, think about what you're actually trying to accomplish, and then talk to the individual of what's in it for them in their language.
Let me just add a sort of second corollary question to that, as Caitlin, maybe you could address this. When you think about upskilling where you've got a variety of roles and personas and skill sets and appropriate starting points for those learner personas, which I assume you do in the context of what you're doing. How do you think about that? You know, to training for all or upskilling for all or very siloed, piecemeal upskilling on a persona basis? How are you attacking that?
Yeah, so we started with that, let's come up with our personas. And we ended up with 37 of them and thought, okay, this isn't going to work. And so, I think the most straightforward way to break down the way we've decided to approach this is that there's a different approach for leadership. We've got one approach for our executives, and then for our sort of mid to upper level people managers, people whose leadership, whether it's big picture or tactical, needs to reinforce the culture change that we're trying to put into practice. And then we have an approach for more of our individual contributors, people that need to be in the weeds. And I am someone with a learning and development background. I've been working in L&D for data for a number of years, but still, I don't have the expertise to sit down with our marketing associates and our investment associates and everyone in between, client experience, and say, hey, this is what you would actually need to do to improve the way that you're working right now. Plus, then we get this new technology. There's a lot of moving pieces. So really what we want those people to be doing is to be able to identify opportunities to use data in their roles, and then to have the ability to go after the skill sets they need to do that effectively. And so that's really what we've been trying to teach. And so I think utilizing a project-based approach has been really central to that. We have online self-paced coursework. We have live virtual sessions that our individual contributors go through, but the most critical piece is a role-based project. Their manager has to help them choose that, and we have to, at least at our second level, it has to have a business ROI, even if it's really small. Like, I fixed this bit of a process, and it's not perfect because we'd need this new technology to make it amazing, but it's a little bit of a step forward, or whatever it might be. And that's allowed us to address people in so many different roles because I'm not trying to be the subject matter expert in everything. We're teaching the culture change and utilizing their managers to help connect those skills to their actual role right now.
That's actually really great and a super segue. Valerie, you're doing a lot of consulting with different companies. How do you tease out the information that Caitlin's talking about? She's inside an organization, so she has a more of a captive audience, but when you're working across different organizations, what is working for you to tease out the meat behind those questions that Caitlin is exploring?
Yeah, there was such great points already brought up. I would say when working with ranges of organizations from a Dow Chemical that has 160,000 employees to a nonprofit that has 300, what we've found working across such diverse organizations is there actually is a natural segmentation, a top order segmentation of what are the higher level roles that you can start with, and then you get in more of the contextualization by role. So the highest level roles that we look at is, first of all, most of the organization would fall into kind of, we call it data day-to-day. They use data in a day-to-day basis. Try to say that 3 times fast, data day-to-day. Data day-to-day, maybe that's 70% of the organization overall, depending on the nature and the culture of the organization. Then think of people that wear data, and when I say data, I really mean data and analytics and all of the things included, right? Because that's also a dynamic of the language. But so the second would be data and analytics as a minor, where maybe you are embedded in a business unit, in a function, in an area of the business, and you are one of the local specialists who is really bringing that content alive locally. So you're embedded. So that's maybe like your minor, but maybe you're a supply chain professional or an inventory specialist, but you are really exceptional at the data and analytics. Then there's data as a major, which are your data engineers, your prompt engineers, your data scientists, who are really, that is your major, that is your career, that is your job. Those are the 3. And then across the top, to Caitlin's point, you have the leadership. The leadership, depending how low you want to go, that has to have a different treatment. And you will have leaders who are on the left end of more of a day-to-day use, and you will have leaders on the right side, like a chief data officer, who are extremely deep. Among all of those, they need a shared level of data literacy to the point of what is that shared set of essentials that we want everyone to be sharing as a common basis. From that, you can develop degrees of fluency and mastery. To answer the question finally.
Yeah, no, it's good. This is what we need to
From that, then everything is about context, and I refer to them as dialects. So what someone in supply chain versus a call center versus an executive and a CFO, incredibly different. So we always talk about data literacy contextually, and that is where then once you understand what is the nature of the role and the segment, you can start layering what is job specific, role specific.
Caitlin talked about the importance of project-based learning in this as a vehicle which could provide that kind of contextualization. Have you observed the same thing in your work?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to approach it. You certainly want to do some of this kind of top-down segmentation and roles, and people want to see themselves in the model. They're like, okay, where do I fit? But on the other hand, if there are immediate projects that are aligned with specific business objectives, there's no reason why you have to be looking at the entire employee population. You start with, okay, we have this project. It has a very heavy data and AI piece. Let's do a SWAT team on making sure that team that is involved has a readiness factor, right? You do a little intervention, go in there, help them specifically, facilitating how do they communicate effectively. Because if they're not teaming and sharing a common language, it can be incredibly difficult to collaborate.
Can I add a quick
Please.
to that? So I think one of the challenges that I see across the companies I work with is you have the CPO, the Chief Privacy Officer, the CDO, the Chief Data Officer, and the CISO, right, Information Security Officer. And they don't speak the same language. But yet all the foundational capabilities that we all talk about, quite frankly, they all need the same stuff at a baseline, and then they can build off of that foundational capabilities. Just getting those 3 into a room, speaking the same language, understanding that if they all work together instead of all doing their pockets of their own tool sets, their own projects, their own scopes, their own definitions, they can actually accelerate the time to value for all 3. And then you can actually save some budget. What a concept that is, right? So I think it's the different levels from the executive. And to be honest with you, my experience, I would say, if you can get the executives on the same page, speaking the same language, then kind of going to the next levels gets a little bit easier because they're not going to each function speaking differently, and then they're all on the same, learning the same stuff, but they're speaking past each other, and they're not even realizing that there's a data literacy program because they're all speaking differently. And I think that's a really core concept. Get the executives that deal with data, and I probably have the CTO, the CIO, there's a lot of C's, right? Get them all together speaking the same language and understanding how this value can be valuable to each of them.
I wanted to ask a question that I didn't give you a warning about, sorry panelists, but that was inspired by some of what we were just talking about.
This one goes to Stephen.
So we've talked about the idea of sort of tip of the spear practitioners or top of the pyramid practitioners. We talked about citizens and kind of in between. We haven't really talked about producers and curators of data. And in a generative world that we're sort of living in now, creating net new artifacts has become easier than ever. So I'm curious, as you've worked with companies, if you're having conversations about how we extend the data literacy conversation to ensure that we're responsibly curating and producing net new information, not just leveraging the information that we have. Is that something that's come up in any of your conversations, Kishore, maybe?
Yes, especially in this, to your point, right, generative AI world, where a lot of the models, for lack of a better word, just speaking just a little bit technically on that one, those models, they consume data. We all know this, right? We all know the OpenAI. We all know the things that have been going on with other ones. And one of the biggest challenges, to your point earlier, is content creators. Like, what kind of content, what kind of data is actually being used and consumed in order to produce the information you're looking for? Now, take the same thing, right? And then now you're running it against your own corpus of data, which is a large company, a large corpus of data. Now, you have the C-suite sitting at the top. They're looking for a certain kind of an answer. Let me just put it this way. That's the reality of it, right? Because they have the gut thing. Hey, okay, you want me to go look at this data? Fine. Just show me this data so that I can answer the way that I want it to answer, right? So then comes the really challenging thing, like, hey, can you make the system answer the way that I want it to answer? Right? You already see how this thing is going to make its way through the cycle. So that is, to me, the biggest challenge, is to figure out where the data is coming from, and do we all agree to it? Like one of the earlier points, while I was saying, look, I've seen people sit together in large organizations like, who is our customer? They don't even have an understanding of who your customer is. I mean, that's as fundamental. You would think that they would know that. But no, it's not there. So that's kind of some of the challenges.
It's fun to think about the recursive loop of machine learning, creating data to use to train machine learning, to create data to use to train machine learning, to create data, which we actually can do now. We are doing at high scale. It's crazy.
It's turtles all the way down.
Yeah.
Could I just add on to the comment? So the point about who is on the front line entering or affecting data quality, think of the amount of money that organizations are spending on data quality and, dare I say, data governance, which usually people break out in hives with that phrase.
Data enablement. Enablement.
Data enablement, okay. So one of my pet peeves, and I may be a little controversial here, is when we say a data literacy program is all about better decision making, I think that's too narrow. Data literacy facilitates better innovation through collaboration. Data literacy also promotes better data quality. And the example I'd like to give is a simple one. Anybody ever work in a grocery store? Who's worked in a grocery store? Raise your hands. Okay. Anybody know when you are scanning bananas, and I know they have QR codes now, or they have the scanner codes, but play along. Anybody know what the 4-digit number is for bananas?
4011.
Well done.
It is 4011. I see you. Okay. So what happens if you are looking at an individual, let's say it's a Walmart store clerk who is scanning the groceries and has to enter the code. If the avocados come across, that is a new store clerk and does not know the code, and he or she says, I'm just putting in 4011. What happens on Cinco de Mayo when people come to buy avocados to make guac? They have a sale on bananas and no avocados. So my point is, data quality on the front line is critical. And if you can engage people in a data literacy discussion about their role and how important it is on the front line of data, and give them a personal life example like that they will remember, they will look at their role differently.
Yeah, I just want to plus one on the frontline input problem for our folks. At the Rue Institute, I teach master's programs and project-based learning for our students, so we're usually doing projects for a sponsor. We did a project for a regional chain of auto repair and tire warehouse type organizations. You would not believe how many ways there are to spell Toyota. Like, it's unbelievable, right? And all of a sudden, the data gets rendered useless without work by a skilled practitioner to deal with that problem. It's a massive problem in organizations. So I'm totally with you on that one. Yeah, please jump in.
But I think that it's a fundamental problem about where investments want to be made. Because we fix things at the analytics site, instead of fixing it at the data creation site, we just keep repeating the same errors over and over again. But if you go in and have a discussion with the person that owns that process and says, we need a certain amount of investment because we got to put validation rules at the point of entry, as an example, but that costs money.
Yes.
And they're like, well, but it's not going to change our output of our reports. And I'm like, yeah, but you're investing like 10 times that to fix the reports. And that's the fundamental discussion that has to happen. But again, it's about the literacy of understanding what the impact of fixing the source systems are. And by the way, some source systems, and I won't name what they are, you can't change things. It takes like 6 months to change like one validation rule. That's part of the problem, right? So we need technology, we need investment, and we need the linkage and the lineage, if you will, from the data creation all the way through the data decision making.
So something to add to our data literacy conversation is how we think about upfront creation implications that would stem from better literacy and how we would go ahead and enforce that. That's great. Someone said earlier, I don't remember which one of us it was, that we are struggling a little bit with the fact that a lot of this feels like a fad, right? A few years ago, everybody needed to go to the cloud. Now everybody needs to get data literate and go to AI. And how do we engage our organizations to ensure that either it's not dismissed as a fad or viewed as just another mandatory compliance type training activity as opposed to a step function business change that really is what it implies. Anybody, Caitlin, maybe, how are you guys talking about that inside of HarborVest?
Yeah, so actually it's very much related to what you all were just saying. The AI hype has given our executives a ton of stress. Obviously, in the finance industry, we are strongly governed by the SEC. There are lots and lots of rules, and in particular, the private markets industry is way behind other financial institutions just in the way that our data is delivered. Like, we still have a massive team of people who read quarterly reports from our investments on PDFs and type them into Excel spreadsheets. So that's what's happening. And so and we're not alone, all of the, that whole industry functions this way, and you can't really just change on your own because all of your investors are sending you the PDFs, right? And so there's been a lot of concern about AI. Are we behind? Is this something that's either going to matter and we need to hurry up, or, exactly, like, is this just a fad that's going to go away? And really what we've been discussing is sort of that AI education and turning it back to data governance and saying, well, it's going to take some time before our data is in a place where we could even utilize AI or machine learning effectively with our data sets. And so right now we're sort of in that bottom of the J curve where we're investing in all of the tools and technology to make that possible and governing our data, because garbage in, garbage out, and teaching them that, the investments they're making right now, agreeing to hire data owners instead of, another investment professional, is the stuff that's going to position us to take advantage of AI when that time comes. And so that's mostly how sometimes it feels like we're deflecting, but the reality in our industry is, AI is not something that we can leverage at a huge scale right now. And so just pretty much calming them down and saying, we're on pace with everybody else, we're doing okay.
When we think about organizations, we have sort of our current talent pool that we can upskill, and then we also have new talent that we're onboarding. I used to be an operating company, but now I work in academia, so I'm a little upstream of the operating companies. What can organizations do as they onboard and consider new talent to ensure that the new talent walks in with less of a gap, and then instruct us in the higher education space as to what we ought to do a better job so that you don't have to do all the work on the operating side? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Go ahead.
So we've hit on a couple things with those last two questions. So one is on the, how do you make sure it's not hype? Really what you're talking about there is what is your engagement strategy around this? And one caution I would have with data literacy programming is if you only equate it to training and development, you will only go so far. This is change management work, which has engagement activities, development activities, and enablement activities. On the engagement piece, how do you mitigate the hype? 3 words. Make it personal. Relate it to what matters to somebody, either in their personal life, because this is a life skill, and or their work life and how they will advance, and also to the executives, why this matters to the bottom line. So that's on the hype part. What was the second question?
Second question was, how do we think about as we onboard new talent?
Oh, thank you. So
What guardrails, job description, where you want to go with that?
That's what happens when you get old. Memory's a team sport. Okay, so on that development part of a program, again, we think of competencies, learning paths, different types of courses, but onboarding and the HR profession, onboarding new talent, having this become part of job descriptions, part of performance appraisals. One of the quick wins that our data literacy leads do absolutely in the first phase, get 10 minutes in the new onboarding course or in the new onboarding process, get 10 minutes in that. I think, Lane, you did that with your program. Get 10 minutes immediately, welcome. Because if you think about those people coming in, yes, you want to share that with them and give them that frame, but they then become ambassadors in the organization and they're touching a whole bunch of people. So 10 minutes onboarding as a start, then you formalize it as more part of HR process.
And linking to hire, fire, promote practices within the firm, really important. Most people don't have any actual skill sets in the job descriptions for these types of things that we're talking about.
Can I make
Go ahead, and then we're
quick
going to
point?
turn it to our audience for questions. Go ahead, Kishore.
Especially on the onboarding side, one of the things that I'm trying to do that in my own small way is with my data engineering class, and I'm bringing in industry people that I know of into the class. So one of the biggest, shall we say, challenges for a lot of the new engineers who are getting into the field is they feel somehow that, oh, this data science is a cool thing, you just go do it. There's a lot of things that goes behind the scenes. There's a lot of grunt work, a lot of messiness around it, which they don't understand, they don't get it. So when they enter the workforce, and I have been on the other side of hiring the workforce, their knowledge or their notion of what the reality is very different from what is actually happening, right? So to me, I feel that bridging that gap, if you will, is so critical. So that they will walk into the field, think they know with the eyes wide open.
+2 and +3 for project-based learning, right? Exposing students to what it's really like. Okay, let's open it up to questions from folks in the audience. We have an amazing knowledge base here. Who's on microphone duty? Or maybe we need to borrow it. Thank you.
I need to get up. What a great panelist. Can we have a round of applause for Stephen? Yeah.
You got paid extra for that.
My major contribution for the day.
Go ahead.
It's great panel. It's can you hear me?
Yeah.
It resonates with a lot of my experience as well. Few things that quite resonate with me. What Kishore mentioned, that that people sometimes think they know something, but they don't. So actually, that requires a lot of change management that you mentioned. But what I'm more interested in, how to do enablement, because sometimes providing training is not enough. You have to do more than that. How you really enforce and make sure that people continue to do this? What is the best practice from your perspective? And also the second question is, are you suggesting that the companies should do this internally or externally? And what is the role of maybe data evangelist in doing this? Okay.
What do you mean by internally or externally?
I mean, just the companies do this internally, actually, when they develop data literacy program, or they hire someone like your company to help them in that journey?
So first of all, the reason I set up a company that is not a consulting company is I fundamentally believe you do not change culture from the outside, period. You change culture from the inside. The challenge with data literacy is still a new and emerging field. So people on the inside, how on earth do they get trained up and figure out how to do this on their own? So for me, I do train the trainer leveraged model with a peer community so people can help each other. I don't think you change it from the outside, number one. On the enablement side, I think you have to have a series of very simple, repeatable mnemonics that people can use on a regular basis that become part of the fabric of how people engage. Yes, there are enablement things like office hours, and there's a lot of great features and technologies that enable data literacy, but at the end of the day, I think you need a methodology that scales. So my method is called ISL. I invented it. It's called Information as a Second Language. I remember you referenced being an English as a second language learner this morning. I think it has to be that pervasive and that systemic to the point where you say, how do we model the language, to the point where I have a thing called the VIA model. 3 parts of the language: value, information, analysis. Someone gets trained up on the VIA model. The next meeting, we're hearing about how they're already talking about the VIA model. It's becoming part of the cultural fabric. That to me is enablement, where you have business literacy, data literacy, and AI literacy coming together. That's what I would offer as a start.
I would just follow up, and very, very tactically, it's our mid-level managers that make all the difference here. It is making sure that their business objectives have they have a clear vision for how they're going to utilize data effectively to get there, and that those sort of things are embedded in the goals for their team members, that these are being measured and they have good processes, whether it's, in weekly stand-ups or however they're sort of measuring progress, because, what gets measured gets managed, and all of that, it has to be part of actual tactical processes, and people have to be accountable for that. And so we found that that is hands down the biggest lever. As soon as we said, these are our goals, at a firm level, we got cooperation.
Great. Do we have other questions? We've got just a couple minutes. Happy to take them.
In all the businesses, I'm sure there is going to be a complacency creeping up pretty quickly, that instead of doing the data the old-fashioned way, where you have to drag and drop and make actually plots, pretty soon artificial intelligence is going to promise some kind of a magical tool where the data can be generated into a dashboard. All of you who have been engaged in these conversations, how are you trying to convey to the management down the line that you can generate anything, but somewhere there has to be a domain expert deep down in the hierarchy who actually has to understand? Otherwise, you would be creating correlations that wouldn't make any sense. And then not only the businesses get hurt, but how they affect the society is a bigger hurt than the businesses. Are there conversations happening at the top level?
Yes, that's a great point you bring up, because one of the biggest challenges, especially earlier this year when ChatGPT came out and all the CIOs and everybody was jumping up and down saying we need to implement it. One of the biggest challenges that I had is to kind of have a conversation about the limitations of the system. Meaning, it is not a panacea. It's not something you just come in and use and it's going to go. There needs to be a human in the loop to really kind of augment that and talk about it and kind of walk through that. So to me, that was one of the biggest challenges with that. Meaning that just because you're just using this tool to help you reduce the friction to get at the information does not mean that the information itself is magically there and available. The old way of thinking about it and doing it does not go away. It just simply means it scales it up, and then it exasperates it even worse in a lot of situations than that. At least that's where
I would just add to that, this is a +4 for learning by doing, which is that when employees, anyone with the base level of data literacy will understand that a small tweak in any part of that process will dramatically affect the analytical outcome that is ultimately presented, say, to a consumer. And so, but if people don't know that, right, they have to experience it. They have to see that. Look at this very small thing we did at some point in this process, from raw data to what you see as a widget in your call center UI, and the massive difference in outcome. So you then, as the consumer, need to be an educated consumer. Think about that, understand that, realize that the chain of activity that leads to ultimately the thing that you are consuming has in and of itself flaws. And then organizationally, then that makes the case for why we need humans in the loop, ultimately, to mitigate those effects. It's a huge problem. As a former software vendor, I can tell you that software vendors will be delighted to say, oh yeah, just buy the software, it'll be fine. Right? But we know better. We need to evangelize to our organizational counterparts by showing them.
Does it pass the smell test?
Yeah, can it pass the smell test, right? And for that, people need to know how to administer a smell test, right? Exactly.
I do also think the undertone of your question is also the criticality of not losing the business literacy and the domain expertise, and not just saying we're going to bring in a business person. we're talking about a convergence of disciplines and really a shared language. So ensuring that the data engineers and the data scientists are elevating their domain expertise in the areas of the problems they're solving. Because how do you collaborate and really understand ethical, privacy, security, bias implications if you can't truly have a conversation about those? That requires a shared language, including business acumen.
I think that's an awesome place for us to stop. We've got next group coming. Can you thank this amazing set of brainpower here? Thanks so much, everyone.